Welcome to Inside Media Relations, the podcast for PR people serious about getting their stories covered. In this episode, the news finds you, the changing rules of audience building. We're looking at one of the biggest shifts happening in journalism today, how audiences discover news and why journalists are building direct relationships with people through social platforms. I'll be joined by Richard Chambers, news correspondent with Virgin Media News, to explore how journalism is adapting to a world where attention is fragmented, audiences are harder to reach, and reporters are becoming media brands in their own right. To start today, I'm joined by Dylan Kerrigan from the MediaHQ research team for another edition of Inside Media Research. Dylan will share some fascinating new research into regular features in the media, looking at where media outlets return to the same formats and what they can teach PR professionals about generating coverage. Let's get inside media relations. Welcome, Dylan. You've been researching regular features and adding all the details of your research to MediaHQ. Regular features aren't really about stories first, they're about formats. I think once you understand those formats as a PR person, you'll probably have greater success. I suppose let's start at the start. What is a regular feature?
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I suppose the most simplistic definition of a regular feature is a piece of content that happens consistently, follows the same format, and can have the same contributors or different contributors, but the bottom line is the regular feature will always follow the same format no matter the guest. So that would be the most simplistic definition. And in terms of the teams, during my research of this, there's so many. They can, like, for example, one from the Irish Independent is My Pet and Me. That's a regular feature where someone is interviewed about how kind of their pet impacts their life. And then another regular feature on the other side of things is like the debrief panel, newspaper panels, different things like that. So that would be the most basic definition of the regular feature.
So, like, you've looked at hundreds of these. I suppose, have you seen any patterns or trends across of all of the stuff that you've looked at?
Yeah, I suppose in terms of like outlets, they rely on these reoccurring formats. Anytime you turn on the radio, you could be listening to it in the background, but you're listening to a regular segment that's on the show regularly. Maybe you might know it or not. It could be a specific interview, it could be a debate, it could be a panel. Yeah, and they have the same structures like each week. So it gives PR people a massive opportunity. Like, if you can understand these formats, it will make pitching and getting a story covered a lot easier.
And sometimes, like, I often wonder, the opportunity that's lost is, and I see it with the stuff that's shared by PR people on MediaHQ, people obsess about, the creative hook and getting the story out there. But that's just one part of it. Really good PR people, get in, they do the research and they see, well, what formats that are there already could I fit this into, or could I shape this for a format?
Yeah, like, I've spoken to a lot of producers and editors who are working on these regular features, and the one thing that surprised me is how specific they are. So in terms of, for example, there's a regular feature on News Talk called The Executive Chair on one of their business programs. So if you didn't know before pitching to that, if you wanted to get a colleague or something on that, like the company needs to have a certain number of employees, for example, to feature on that program. So, like, different things like that. But it's so specific. Like, so one of the biggest mistakes PR people make is just doing one outreach, for example. So, or following one kind of format in their outreach. So, for example, on the Brendan O'Connor show, 2 regular features is the newspaper panel, and then another one is My Life in 5 songs. So you can think of like how different pitching someone to the newspaper panel would be compared to pitching someone on My Life in 5 songs. So one is just more serious kind of news and current affairs. Other is more human interest and storytelling aspects. So different things like that you need to take into consideration.
And you notice too, like, the 2 regular features I'm absolutely obsessed with. I'm a huge fan of the Sunday Times, but in their Sunday Times magazine, they have a regular feature called Relative Values, where they take two people who are related to one another and they talk about their relationship. And one of the things you notice in that is, you know, it's someone has a new album coming out, or they have a new TV show, or they have a play coming up, and at the end of it, it'll say, you know, John's play is on the Royal Theatre, and then the other one at the back of that magazine is called A Day in the Life, and someone tells you about their daily routine, and they say, look, I get up and I have granola, and it goes everything from kind of rock stars to people in their 90s, and just back to what you said there, like, the regular feature, which is a panel, so there's ones that you can, if you acquit yourself well. So if you take something like the review of the week on the Today program on Radio 1 with David McCullough, like if you're a good guest on that, you'll get asked back, and then some of them are one hit and you're done. Like you're not going to be doing My Favorite Pet every 3 weeks.
Exactly, yeah, Jack. And it all comes like there's so many differences in regular features. Like for example, so I'll give you a comparison between newspaper and broadcast. So one of my favorite regular features, and my colleague Ben, we discuss this all the time, is my supermarket, the supermarket taste test. Sorry, so that's in the Indo. So each week, they take a certain number of brands, whether it could be like ketchup one week, it could be yogurt another week, and then they'll do a review on that. So the way a PR person would pitch to that compared to a segment on Moncrief, movies and booze, for example, it's chalk and cheese. Like, so there's one that's more formal in like hard copy or whatever, just giving info about the different products, like and then another, as I go back to again, is more human interest and storytelling aspects. So you need to take into consideration, like if you're pitching to, for example, movies and booze, is the person I'm pitching able to tell a good story, able to put a bit of humor in it as well? So
and if you even take movie and booze, like you could have a low budget film coming out, or you could have a craft beer from North Longford, and if you can get, like, you know, 12 bottles of your craft beer into the hands of the producer and say, look, this is a cracking new craft beer and we think it should be on the slot, but you need to do the groundwork.
Yeah, exactly. And like we've included now, so we've added over 60 regular features onto the MediaHQ database, and I've gathered loads of insights from producers and people directly working on these regular features, and they feature on the biographies. So we've created a pitch and tips section. So it gives, we're not only providing our users with contact details, we're giving them real insights into how they can get their story and picked up and covered, or get someone featured on these features. So it's been a very enjoyable bit of work. Like I've really enjoyed doing it, and got great insight. And one thing I've noticed as well from producers and people writing these features is they're crying out for people and to interview. Like I was in touch with a certain person from the Indo, like, and they were asking me for suggestions for interviews and stuff like that. So like, it's a bit of a missed opportunity for PR people. Like when people are crying out, like if you know the format of the feature and you can get your head around the team and create a good story, you'll have a better chance of getting picked up. And due to us putting the pitch and tips on the biographies, we're giving you the best chance to get your story covered.
And I suppose from a PR point of view, from energy, like keep that energy, that outbound energy, creating your press releases and sending them out to people.
Yeah.
But do the research, dig in and see where the other opportunities are for your spokespeople, for your brands, or for your products.
Yeah, exactly. And like, don't just pitch the journalist, pitch the format as well. And another thing as well, make sure you're pitching to the right person. I've been in touch with like people from the Brendan O'Connor show, and like it's great adding individual producer names as well, but they were explaining that like the production panel on the show could change from week to week. So it's little things like I've included in bios, like make sure you include the show email as well as pitching individual producers. It's the best chance of getting stuff picked up.
Thanks, Dylan. That's fascinating, and it gives loads of opportunities for people to get their stories out there.
Thanks, Jack.
Richard Chambers is a news correspondent with Virgin Media News and one of Ireland's best-known journalists. Over his career, he has covered some of the biggest stories in Ireland and abroad, reporting on politics, current affairs and breaking news. More recently, Richard has built one of the largest social media audiences of any Irish journalist, reaching millions of people through platforms like Instagram and TikTok. Journalism is always about finding audiences, but what has changed is where those audiences are. Richard, you're very welcome today.
Jack, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Let's go back to an evening in February 2016. I think it was probably the first time we met.
Probably would have been.
Yeah. You were relatively new in News Talk, and we got the hospital pass of an exit poll on a general election. And I think we were broadcasting at 10 o'clock. And it was the first time I'd met you, and like we were all kind of giddy after an election campaign, and like I got a sense pretty quickly this guy's serious about what he's at here. You're a fair bit younger than me, but you're probably late 20s, early 30s, mid 20s.
No, mid 20s.
Mid 20s, yeah. And I kind of thought this is a fellow going somewhere.
Yeah.
He's in here, and you definitely caught my attention that night. That was the start of your broadcast career.
Yeah, I was in News Talk I was in Today FM first out of college about 2011, say.
Yeah.
So I was around News Talk then for a while. I started after doing like reporting out and about and news bulletins, got the chance to do some programs. And that actually was, people still talk about that show, that election, because it was the first time anybody had done a sort of an exit poll radio show on Irish broadcast media, and we got loads of news lines out of it because the exit poll was so shocking. So it was just really interesting. It was a great spot to be in, to be able to put a show like that together, like on the fly. And it was very on the fly. With Michael ringing him up and asking him about whether or not he had confidence in Enda Kenny going forward and all that sort of stuff. Like there was great news lines out of it.
Yeah.
And then the idea was nicked, obviously, for every general election since. But it just shows like.
And did you see that maybe as a way, like you weren't long in the door there, that it was probably one of the first presenting gigs you got in there?
It was, yeah. And we did other ones as well. We did a sort of similar thing for the US election 2016 as well. And now we didn't carry on through the night. And it started off looking really decent for Hillary Clinton based on the early data. We had loads of interviewees telling us that she was definitely going to win. We always did, and there was a great team of young people in News Talk. That's something I'll always say about News Talk and Bauer and Communicore as it was then. They had loads of young people in researcher and producing roles, or gave them opportunities to do things and interesting and creative things. Like we had a ball when we did.
But there's not a real case of embracing your constraints. Like the money wasn't good, but you know there was a fader and a live microphone and a format in which you could learn your craft.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be a magnet for people who were hungry, people who wanted to get on.
Yeah, and some really, really great people have gone through there over the years. And just even you talk behind the scenes researchers and producers, they have staffed now RTEs, their whole takeover, the whole change that has happened in RTE radio. A lot of that is News Talk people. And it is the creativity that you learn from being given the sort of space to actually, let's try somebody different. Somebody I know might be a good talker. They may not be necessarily the biggest name in comparison to some of the more like regular, featured panelists or contributors, but knowing somebody who'll be able to tell a good story or who'll be able to inject a bit of colour and a bit of juice into proceedings, and just even messing around. We added in musical stings and stuff like that. I think we played on Noah Rock because he obviously infamously was a Hillary Clinton intern. We played him on with The Rock from WWE's music and bits and bobs. We just had the ball.
And when you don't have money, you have to be creative.
You have to do something different, and that did stand to us. So, some of the stuff and the innovation and just being creative that I learned and that I had the chance to express myself back then has 100% been part of my career since then.
So let's go back to the start. And when I was researching today, your background is a bit like Charlie Haughey. You seem to have moved around a bit and hit various counties. So started in Clare, moved to Belfast.
No, wrong way.
Okay.
Yeah, born in Belfast, 1989.
Moved to Clare.
Moved with my mum and my brother to Clare in 94. Which was a very brilliant time to move to West Clare.
Yeah.
I lived in Lahinch. So some of my earliest and most vivid childhood memories of the Clare Hurl is 1995.
Yeah.
So that was it. So we were there for primary school, moved up to Rush in North Dublin then.
So you were complete Pulshy.
Yeah. And even when you moved to a
had
place
you the
like
flat
Rush,
Clare accent and all that?
I did, yeah. And my mum always jokes that when we came out of Belfast, we spoke very prim and proper. And then as soon as within 2 or 3 weeks in Clare, and this is something I always have, is that I pick up accents very quickly. Is that I was very West Clare very quickly.
Absolutely tremendous.
Yeah. So I mean that's something I do remember. But so we moved up to Rush in North Dublin, early 2000s, and been in Dublin ever since. So more than half of my life has been in Dublin now, which feels weird.
And you went to UCD to study law.
Yeah, which was a complete disaster.
Yeah, and for someone who is creative, who likes ideas, the structure of law, how dry it can be, the amount of reading. You're someone who's kind of high on adrenaline, who likes moving around the place. I'd imagine that was a recipe for disaster.
It was a bit of a recipe. It's one of those things where, like, if you ask kids when they're 17 and 16, effectively, to pick what you want to be for the rest of your life, and when you have, like, you're somebody who's going to get decent-ish points in the Leaving Cert, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know, I have no idea. I was just going to do law because that's what's sort of expected of you.
Yeah.
So that's what I did, and then going to UCD from Rush and North Dublin is a hell of a schlep.
And you were obviously living at home, were you?
Yeah. So commute, and it was early days of the recession as well. So it was like it felt bleak at times. So, like, all the lectures at 9 o'clock, I'll always remember getting trains at like 6 in the morning. Yeah. And, like, not even direct trains. You get off in Pier Street and you walk around town to get a bus. It's just mad. So I was just wrecked by the time I got to college, and then I just didn't assimilate into it, which is a problem that used to be a big problem in UCD, is that it can be quite an unforgiving place, or it could be, I should say. It's changed a lot since then, for people who are outsiders, who weren't from around.
And you were in a class with people who were from South County Dublin, getting up at 10 to 9 and falling in,
and you're not living on campus, so you don't have that connection as well. So it's tough. So, like, within, I'd say, about 3 or 4 weeks, I kind of knew, oh, I'm in trouble here. This isn't actually what I want to do. But because it was a 3-year program, the BCL and I stuck it out. Yeah. Which I think great teachers.
Great commitment to
you have to. But then it came around to the 3rd year, and I was like, geez, I need to find something else to do.
Yeah. And did you travel those summers, or what did you stay around?
A bit of interrailing and stuff like that, which is amazing. But, like,
so you came to the end of it then, and you needed to think of a next step. And the journalism program at DCU, there's two, like there are two. There's TUD as it is now, and
which is great,
and DCU, and you applied to the masters there.
Yeah, got in there. I sort of came into journalism on UCD. I was working for the college paper, doing, like, match reports in sport, because that's what I was like, Jesus, if I could find a great way into sports journalism, my life would be made, because it's my number one passion is sport. And it was great. It started off really well there. Went into the master's program, which was great. Like, I've met some of my best friends.
I've often wondered about sports journalism, though. Like, I had a friend who got a brilliant job as a soccer correspondent in his 20s, and he was a huge Leeds fan. And he went to be going to Premier League games every Saturday, and he said he hated it. He said it turned the thing I enjoy most into an absolute drudge.
That's the fear. That is the fear I did have. Now, obviously, it's tough enough to get into the industry, but I felt like if I love sport this much, and all of my waking hours outside of work or study are ingesting and taking in sport, don't want to create a cynical version of myself where I end up hating it. I'm like, I'm sick of these people, and these sporting icons that I love are absolutely, like, awful people behind the scenes.
And the funny thing is, you meet sports people sometimes, and some of the best sport people don't have a lot going on.
No, they can be tough interviews as well. Yeah. So media training does kick in for those guys 100% as well.
So sometimes when you look back at it, who were the notables in your masters in DCU?
Kieran Cuddihy, now in RTE, very much so. He's a couple of years older than me. I was one of the younger ones in the class at that time. Again, I think I was 21 when I came out of that class, which is very young still for it. And again, to try and figure out what you want to do in a career is tough. Other guys, Conor Barnes, who's an editor of Morning Ireland, Joe Coffey as well, who's working as a producer in 2FM now. A couple of other people who've now, obviously not everybody stays in the industry as well. Raf Diallo, who's really, really good, does the soccer podcast in RTE. Like, those 3 guys would be some of my closest friends still to this day. And again, just really creative guys who are just as soon as you're given an opportunity to do something, like, we made Team 33, myself, Raf and Joe, when we were in Newstalk. We all ended up freelancing and interning in Newstalk. We made Team 33, which is like a sort of a really off the wall sort of sports show.
Very subversive thing to do. I often wondered about that, because it existed where the Juggernaut brand of Off the Ball was there, and then you had this kind of fringe real nerdy stuff. We did one show where we actually, again, just because it was just mad creative, we were like, we're going to do, because it was all about football nostalgia, which is massive now. We were well ahead of that. Like, you know, the way people spend like 300 quid now on retro jerseys and stuff. Like, we were all over that beforehand. This is like 12, 15 years ago, even at this point. I have no idea how long it was. We did a whole show as if we were doing the 95-96 Premier League season. As if it was in almost in character, like, you know, Fergie will never win anything with kids, and Newcastle have gone too far ahead, like they'll never be caught at this point. It's just mad. They're just really, really interesting creative people. It's amazing to sort of see where those guys have gone on to. Like, Team 33 ended up as a radio program. Won the PPI for Best Sports Show again, which is a massive upset. It is mad,
for just a hobby show for 3 lads
and it was so inside baseball. It was back to that thing of when I met you first in 2016. if you give committed people who want to do good work an opportunity, that's kind of what happens.
It'll pay dividends, yeah. So that's something I think newsrooms and media organizations of any kind need to be conscious of, especially when you have now more tools than ever before to be creative and to let people express themselves and try new things.
Isn't it like I did the postgrad journalism in DIT as it was then, but isn't that one of the big challenges then? You're 21, you come out of DCU, you mentioned about 4 of the notables in your class, but then like it is kind of like doing the Grand National where all these fences are put in front of you. Then you have to kind of try and break into the industry, and that can be like that burns off so many people at that point where the next big jump comes and people want to do it, but they don't want it as much as some people, and they give up and they do other things.
And it's a gritty road as well sometimes. Like I remember I was freelancing as a sub editor in the Star for a long time while I was waiting for a job to sort of pop up again, hopefully in broadcasting. Like I'd freelanced in Today FM, or I'd interned, I should say, as part of the master's program. There wasn't any freelance shifts available for a good few months after that. So I was basically like, what can I do now? So I was in the Daily Star, sub-editing, like writing headlines and stuff. Enjoyed it from a creative point of view because it kept like a certain part of your brain working. But again, long schlep from Rush, and it wasn't really sort of filling me with joy. But like I knew that if I wanted to really make this happen, journalism wise, like I needed to be at least somewhat in the industry. I needed to be able to subside it, to live and pay my own bills and stuff. But yeah, like you will have awful jobs along the way, and it is often a case of determination. It's great luck as well that opportunities did arrive. Like if the opportunity to work freelance for Today FM and News Talk didn't arrive when it did, like I could well have just been ended up like, well, what am I going to do? I've a fairly sub-level law degree from UCD and a couple of shifts in the Star. I mean, what do I do after this?
And was there a point where, like, as misaligned as you felt doing law in UCD, when you got into DCU to do the journalism, did you get a feeling pretty quickly, okay, this is for me?
I loved it. Anything to do with, even web design and publication design. I just love all aspects of media. I was just loving it. It was great to work with people who like the same interests as you, which I didn't really feel I had in law as well. These are people who are very similar personality types. I think are attracted to journalism sometimes. I was just like, wow,
it's amazing.
This is how it's meant to happen.
Oh,
like,
no,
what was I doing for 3 years or that other place?
Yeah, I had the same feeling because I had done a business degree, and when I arrived into the postgrad course in DIT, like I can remember being in there, and Andrew Lynch, who's still Patrick Frayne were in my class, and a woman called Fiona McCann who's in America and still in journalism. But I can remember looking around and think, I'm in the right place.
Yeah, these are people who I can vibe with. Yeah.
And it was so like the excitement of kind of everybody working on their CV, everybody hustling, everybody looking for an angle.
Yeah.
So you got into News Talk, and I suppose that's when your voice started being heard, and you started kind of building your broadcast reputation. Just tell us a little bit about that break.
Yeah, it was great. I was out and about reporting, sort of that's one of the main news reporters then for News Talk. I would have done a lot of social media at the time as well, Twitter as it was back in the day. I would have had my own voice on that. I think that was fairly instantly notable. I would have had a lot of followers through there. But again, I think just being available, I think, was really good then as a news reporter, traveling around the country doing stories. I worked down on the Pat Kenny show for a while as sort of a more features and as the main program reporter there, and to sort of work alongside Pat Kenny in that sort of sense was amazing. Like you learn so much from this doyen of broadcasting, and the chance to do something a lot longer form. Like if you're doing reports for news bulletins, it's often you're getting a clip of 15 seconds of It's just a script, and you might do a voiceover, which might be a minute maybe, but to be able to sit in studio with Pat Kenny and talk to a 20-minute report and different clips and what you found along the way, amazing.
What was the biggest thing you learned from Pat Kenny?
I just think he was very much like, I think he very much was of the opinion that you can't sort of put on this sort of fake personality. Like, be yourself, be funny at times, like be honest about things, just be human, I think, which is really important, because I think some people get into media and they feel they have to turn into robots and they have to be, fit inside this template of being just straight, and we all have to talk the exact same way, and every report has to have the same sort of script. So you see all these lines and phrases and turns of phrases which appear time and time again, that they become cliche. Where he was just like, just be yourself, And just like, I'll ask you off the wall questions on different things. Like, you might have an idea of where we're sitting in studio having this conversation about what you learned looking into the housing crisis in Galway or whatever. And I might ask these left of field questions just completely off the wall. And they might like, and it was just, I think it taught me as well not to let things throw you as well. Like, if you were getting this, like, Pat Kenny is an encyclopedia in his mind.
So researched.
And he's asking about, like, like commercial rates in Galway. He says, I haven't a clue about all this stuff. I'm just going to have to learn on your feet.
Yeah.
And it also teaches you just to do your research, because he's going to throw stuff at you and you don't want to be caught by Pat Kenny on the fly, live on News Talk, So it was great. He was amazing to work with that.
So you make the transition to TV, and let's fast forward to the pandemic, and we're in February, March 2020. That was just before you made the switch, and then the pandemic comes. We're all locked down. There's only one show in town. It's in government buildings. There's a press briefing afternoon every day. Tell me about the switch to Virgin Media and what began to happen then. You and Zara King, in particular, became focal points for sharing that news, and what you learned about journalism in that, and what you learned about telling a story in that moment.
Really tough. It was above any other time in career. It felt like being in a goldfish bowl, because, as you say, this was the only thing people were watching, and people who had never engaged with news, I think, before, had no other option but to tune in at 5:30 for the news at 5:30, or to look in online. And it was really just a complete pressure cooker of a situation. What did I learn along the way? I mean, I think you learn a lot more about, if people, and you have this huge audience of people across different ages, different demographics, and they are all really hungry for information, not just about their loved ones who might be sick or might be working in hospitals, but about their businesses, about their livelihoods. They don't know what they're going to be doing from one end of the week to the other, because everything that they thought was cemented in their life has been flipped up in the air. So you learn to take on questions from other people. You learn very quickly what people's frustrations are, what people are talking about on the ground, outside of the bubble, really. And it was a real bubble, because, I mean, nobody else is around the city centre. The street where we're on was completely deserted for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And just being able to sort of take on feedback, and just being the audience's person in the room, rather than being this sort of, I don't know, lad in a suit who's just telling you the official line. That's very important.
At what point in it did you realise, like, journalistically, or the transaction between you and the audience, okay, this is different, I haven't felt this before, like, this is more important, or like, more people are tuning in, I'm getting more of a reaction here? When did you realise that?
I think it was put in the first 2 months of it, I think, when it was just really after, like, Leo's speech in Washington and the first lockdown and that, like, it was very instantaneous that this was, okay, this is going to be the definitive thing probably any of us will ever cover. And it feels like we've actually put it into a complete bottle. We've left it behind over the last 5 or 6 years, and we don't talk about it at all. Very quickly, I just knew, just based on what was getting online, just the reality of our lived situation day to day, like, all of the shops are closed, all that sort of stuff. I mean, you knew quickly that this was something that was very different. People were just all over everything. They were all over everything. And they were obsessed about the daily press conference in the Department of Health. People were trying to learn, like, epidemiology on the fly, and people were looking and doing their own charts and stuff. It's just an insane period. I think it was difficult at that time, because Ireland is such a small country, and we have such a small media sector. And being someone who is, I think I was quite relatable, which is probably why people gravitated towards people like myself and Zara, that we didn't seem, quite buttoned up. And there was a lot of personality in what we did online then, in terms of on Twitter and on Instagram a little bit at the time.
And did that start to build then? Like,
Twitter was massive. Twitter has always been massive for me back from when I started, and I was like, I sort of had a clear voice, and I was clearly had a clear identity, and it was a lot of, like, my own stuff and my own personality came across and things. In COVID, I think people just noticed it a lot more. Like, I didn't change what I did really online. I put out a lot more stuff and covered a lot more broader areas, because of that was the nature of what a pandemic does to a country. But I just think I was kind of myself for a lot of it. But it was a huge amount of stress and pressure. It was really difficult. And then to write a book in the middle of all of that as well, trying to sum up the whole experience of the country during that time, was probably too much for one person to do.
And you were living in a house with 4 journalists?
Yeah. So we were all in a house share in Castleknock, and great at the time, but like again, you probably have no escape from the situation that you're all in. But it was great. We were amazing supports and like friends to each other all the way through that, which was amazing. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't go back anywhere near anything like that ever again. It was just so intense.
So talk to me, and like you've been sharing news on social for quite a while, and you said, in early on Twitter, and that worked really well, and it's well documented, and we all know where Twitter has gone, or X as it is now.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about the switch to TikTok and Instagram, and then that conscious choice that you've made to like really look at it as a channel, as a way of communicating, as a way of connecting, as a way of building an audience.
Yeah, I think I'd done TikToks and Instagram video-y bits on and off, but not in a sort of really focused way since around then the pandemic. I moved off Twitter over the years for various reasons, mostly because it just isn't useful, and it isn't useful as a site for media organizations, I feel personally, in terms of where traction comes from. The way people now have consumed news has changed. So over the last few months, I've been like, okay, I need to be where people are. And Deborah Turness, who's the former head of BBC News, she put it fairly well recently. She's like, look, the news business is changing. People want their news from people. People want people who they can relate to, people they understand, people that they trust, people who speak like they speak, to give them the news rather than, something which can be quite static or quite linear. So that is something. So she has her way of looking. I think she has the sort of the creator journalism thing is probably the biggest shake up to the industry that we've seen since the internet. And I'd probably go along and agree with her on that. So I've been trying to deliver more focused things for people, giving it straight up, whether it's pieces to camera sort of bits or more lengthy, explained, considered pieces which have a longer shelf life on things like, I don't know, Gaza, the housing crisis, things like that. Across those two platforms, particularly on Instagram, and it's just it's paid off. People do appreciate it. I think you can sort of express. Again, it's all about expression. Like I've had to learn a bazillion different things which I've not mastered at all yet. In terms of editing and camera angles and stuff like that. But like it has been really rewarding, because this is where people are going. I've recently done a couple of talks for people like The Guardian, like they're journalists who are like, they've seen what I'm doing over here and like, okay, this is really good. This guy, we should probably try and figure out how we can get our own journalists to do it as well. So that's proof that something's working anyway. But I think, it's hard to sort of, if you're somebody else trying to do this, or if you're a company looking at this and saying, well, how do we do this sort of thing? If this is where people are going to get their news from, how do we do that? You can't really transplant a company into an individual, but you can sort of give individuals, I suppose, the space or the tools to do this sort of thing. So that you have, like, I think CNN has tried to do this recently. They're having a look at this and they're like, okay, we'll have our individual journalists and we're treating them as their own creators, but we'll have we're stable for them. Let them do their thing. We can retransplant their stuff and we can reshare and re-collaborate with all their bits and bobs. And it's in our interest to have these guys in under us while letting them do their own thing as well.
So I just want to read you a post from LinkedIn that you put up.
This is dangerous. Everything is mad cringe on LinkedIn. So great.
Posted here a few months back about putting a concerted effort into Instagram as my prime social media focus for journalism. It's going pretty well. What I've learned is to know what your audience wants, be authentic to your strong suits, and that any down talking about what topics and issues do well online is mostly bunkum. Treat your audience as clued in, engaged adults they are, and be human.
100%. But it's true. I actually, because I think there was a time in news and media in particular, I would say, where you'd look at videos and social media content and you treat it as this dumbed down, almost childlike thing. And it's like that concept, even the word explainer, we all use that. We do explainers. I find that a bit, it's a bit naff. It's like the concept of on the internet of explaining things like I'm 5. And there's a value to that. But for the most part, if you look at, and you have your analytics on Instagram and TikTok, you can see what age your audience are. Like, treat them as very clued in. They're looking at your account and they're following newsy topics. That's why the algorithm has put this video in front of them. They're interested in it. They have a level of knowledge already. But you can explain in-depth things around that.
I have a 19-year-old, and she said, "Oh, News Chambers, yeah.
Exactly.
I see him on TikTok." She said,
"So that's good. That's good." But like that, I think it's important. You have to understand that the people who are watching your stuff, they're really hungry for deeper level of interest of knowledge on things. They want analysis. They don't want just headline facts. X person said Y today. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You need to have a little bit more of it. You have to add value. I think that's the main thing.
So I want to explore 3 separate areas. I'll start with, I want to talk about personal motivation. I want to talk about kind of editorial guidance and control. And I want to just talk about structure of posts. I suppose just on personal motivation first, I have a friend who's a TV journalist, and he said, like, on the bad days, he said, I pull my hair out and think, who's fucking watching this stuff? And like, why am I doing this? Who's watching this stuff? And I would imagine that when you're locked in, like if you were locked into 5:30 on a terrestrial channel, you could feel like that, but I can see where, you know, if it's multi-channel and that you've ways of reaching other people and you're not just stuck on the dial, that sort of engagement is really important.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think as well, because journalists are just naturally creative people, that doing the same thing every single day, it doesn't get the creative juices flowing in the same way. Like, it's great, and I adore my job, and it's brilliant that Virgin Media have allowed me to create and express myself in this way online as well. But I think you need to, like, when I had this sort of switch where I'm like putting up this post saying, look, I've made this effort, I want to do this because I think this is where people are going, and this is important if we're to build trust with people online and news in general. That I wanted to sort of I needed to put a plan in how much am I putting out every week. There's no point in me doing 1 video per week and then just going off, and then 3 weeks later I'll do another one. Like, you have to be like, okay, what can I explain this week? What do people need to know that's not getting elsewhere? And stuff on international relations and international affairs, I think, is something which is very important to do. People can feel like they have no control over situations, and they want things to be explained in plain terms. Things on Sudan, Gaza, stuff at home in terms of fuel crisis, data centers, and energy consumption, all this stuff, which is real, like, it's real heady stuff. It can be very pointy headed and very chin strokey stuff at the best of times. So to be able to bring that to a ground level for people.
So you have an editorial calendar yourself outside of what your markings are on a weekly basis?
Yeah. I'll know I need to put up 2 or 3, 4 things maybe per week.
Okay.
To keep things ticking over and just to keep up with the news, because there's just so much happening.
So talk to me about news editors, about news schedules, about the Virgin Media brand, about your personal brand, about the tensions. So, like, I can see how this is good for Virgin Media. I can also see how it's good for your personal brand. You know, you're commissioned by them. They give you your markings for the terrestrial TV. How does that kind of work as I suppose, an ongoing energy field between you and them and deciding
it's great. Yeah. And we have like loads of new opportunities for people to create and express themselves online. We're doing a lot more social only video now these days as well, shot on phone to be consumed on phones, as opposed to like back when I suppose we started doing video bits online. We started posting just like the VT that went out on the 12:30 to the 5:30 news in full. We just lumped that up on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram. Now we do it a bit more considered because that's what people want. So I think that's not attention. That's actually just like I'm contributing to that in sort of our series, like things like Truth Matters, which are sort of our main misinformation and disinformation and sort of getting people to think about things differently. That's really good. And then, but everybody needs their own sort of platform and channel as well, which again drives people towards Virgin Media. Like, people who will see my bits and bobs online will turn into Virgin Media on TV, or they'll follow Virgin Media on the internet as well to see oh Jesus, this guy's really good. I like what this guy is doing. What are his colleagues? Has he got more colleagues who are doing this sort of thing?
So you have like 3 strands to your work. Then you have the social.
I have too many strands. There's way too much. I need the day off.
You have the socials for Virgin. You have your own socials, and then you have the terrestrial TV.
Exactly. Yeah, and they are all super important. Like the product of TV. Like people don't differentiate these things anymore. If you see, like, we're lucky in Ireland that our terrestrial television audience for news is so strong in comparison to what's happening elsewhere in Europe or what's happening in the States as well. We are really, really blessed to have that. But people don't just say, I'm going to just watch the TV, or I'm just going to watch the social, or I'm going to watch YouTube. People just consume. They're just like, I need to see what's, like, they're watching on their phone, their laptop, or on apps on their TV as well. So, like, you can't treat it as a differentiated thing. Like, they're all different strands, as you're sort of saying, but like, it's all the same thing.
So let's get a little bit nerdy just on content and on form. And like, I was looking at some of your content before we started today, and like, a very sharp edge is important. Like a good intro is important. You use subtitles very well. You use, title cards very well. Just tell us what you've learned about kind of structure and shape of. Like, obviously, if you don't have good content, you can dress it up whatever way you want.
But it needs to look good, because I suppose the thing is, this is one thing I have learned, is that you are competing against businesses. You're competing against legacy organizations who have, I don't know, 1,000 staff around the world. You are in competition with them, because they're going to look for this information from either yourself or from a company or from any other journalist around the world. Like, it isn't just like, I can't just say, oh, well, I'll never compete with The Guardian or the New York Times or RTE or whatever. You need to be able to like have confidence, but you have to also treat your audience with a bit of professional respect. So you'll need to learn up new skills, like things like Canva, like CapCut or Reels, the app for Instagram sort of editing and shooting and teleprompter sort of thing. That's really good. So it needs to look polished to a certain degree. Now, people will appreciate a level of rough around the edges, particularly if you're a journalist yourself. And it also makes it kind of a bit more relatable sometimes, that it isn't just this pristine, sheen, glossy thing which they'd see on TV. Because if that's what they wanted, they'd be watching it on TV. Like, they want people who look like them. Like, I will often be in casual clothes, sitting in a sun trap in the back garden recording these, because I think that's important. If you have, like, it will get people to stop. People even who might have watched me on TV for years. Like, geez, there's your man on TV. What's he doing in his back garden wearing shorts or whatever? Like, like, that's important. It gets people to stop, and they might consider like to stick around for maybe 2 or 3 seconds longer than they otherwise would.
Do you script things?
Generally, I would have an outline, because you need to, like, things need to fit into social media, and like, you can't. There's no point in shooting 5 minutes of an explainer on, I don't know, quantitative easing or something like that. Like, it needs to be digestible. It needs to be smart. It needs to be digestible. You have to order things in, obviously, level of importance. But so sometimes I'll have a script and a teleprompter. Sometimes I'll just be off on the fly. I think that's.
And did you use an iPad for teleprompter or what?
No, I would just on the phone. I would just have, again, the Edits app on Instagram is good for that. And there's other ones as well people have used over the years. They all do the same thing. So, like, having a couple of notes. So I generally wouldn't have a full script.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's good. I don't think it's good.
And start with a big clear point or a question or.
Yeah, I'll have little bullet points on the teleprompter, so that it'll scroll down, and I'm like, well, here I can talk around this point or this point and this point.
Yeah.
Like, you'll see on a lot of reels that journalists do, or any other sort of creators, like, there'll be sharp edits in the middle of it. That's fine. Like, you don't need to be.
It's not Hollywood. Yeah,
it's not Hollywood, and like stopping to regather your thoughts, or to what's the next point I need to make here, can be important, because you have a limited amount of time. You have people on the hook for. Like, get them your best stuff as quickly as possible.
The conclave, the Zelensky visit,
Yeah.
were 2 big pieces in your content. Do they stand out like more than any other?
Yeah, I guess so. The Zelensky one, again, that's why, like, this is a thing, like, you need to find different angles and bits of it. So one of the things I'd noticed, from looking at, and I did the conclave in Rome in 2013 or 14, was one of the first big stories I've ever done. I've been obsessed with the conclave ever since, and the way the Italian media is obsessed with the conclave, and the way that the Italian culture gravitates around the papacy. So when the conclave sort of process was all kicking off, there's a Fanta Papa is what it was called. So it's basically fantasy football, a fantasy conclave thing. I was like, I need to get on this. I need to explain this to people. People loved it. Ireland AM ended up doing a piece on it as well and all that sort of stuff. So just being able to find different angles with a little bit of colour, because it can't all be serious all the way. The visit to the US, the Taoiseach's visit, again, giving people a bit of behind the scenes can always work online as well. Like, I was in the James Espray, the briefing room in the White House, to giving people a bit of a tour around there, explain that it used to be a swimming pool, just little behind the scenes facts they wouldn't get elsewhere. But you need to have, like, you can't do all that, I don't think. I don't think you can just do, here's all the behind the scenes stuff, because then it's not really journalism at this point if it's just all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You need to be able to, like, it's important to show people behind the scenes that you're a real person and keep people interested, because people are obsessed with what happens behind the scenes or how things work. But you need to keep on pointing them back towards, end product, really.
You deal with a lot of PR people. You deal with press advisors for departments, for ministers, for companies.
All very healthy relationships.
The good, the bad, like doorsteps, press conferences. You spend your life in kind of media formats. insights on what's great, what's not great, like tensions, what works really well, when the relationship with PR people is really good, what's it like, and when there's tension, what would you change?
I think for PR people, I think you need to you have to understand that what works for stories most often is people. So it's all well and good pitching, Richard, would you come and cover this thing? We have a launch and it's about the housing crisis, and we have spokesperson, or professor. I'm like, the findings will be really good, and that's important that we get the findings out there. But it's hard to get people, interested in the biggest social issue of our time unless they can see people they can relate to in it. So I think that finding case studies, people who are ordinary people that you can put into this, or if there's a good story, like I know I've had good links with the Mater Hospital over the years since I wrote about them in my book. Like, they're always really good at finding excellent stories of just like ordinary people who have extraordinary lives, transplant people, all of that sort of stuff, and they just put them forward. It's really, really good. It's just so clear, and it just speaks to the volumes and the values of the Mater Hospital and the family and the community around there. Like, that's just a great example. They're so good at that, at finding people who, can express what good work goes on in our health service. Because otherwise you just hear bad story, bad story. And that's natural, because that is what's newsworthy. But sometimes you need to be able to say, if there's a good human story, like, make that the focus, because that's what will get attention, whether it's audiences, never mind newsrooms and journalists and media organizations. Like, you need to give people to look at.
You have a lot of adrenaline in your life. You have a lot of pressure. I know you're a huge running fan. Just that way of kind of staying fit, staying alert, staying mentally grounded, minding yourself. Just talk a little bit about that, because when there's a lot of, the industry and the work can be attritional, and it's, about kind of keeping in tune with yourself.
Yeah, and it's an industry that it's a magnet for obsessives. Like, you probably won't have a long career unless you're over obsessed with the workings of the industry, politics, society, all that sort of stuff. But you need to have downtime. You need to have boundaries, and you need to have downtime. Those two things are non-negotiables, really. So you need to be able to switch off as best you can. So you need to have something, whether that's a hobby, whether that's reading, some sort of physical activity is great as well. Running has been amazing for me. More so it's just something fun to do rather than anything else.
You've run a couple of marathons.
I've done 4 now, yeah, which is great. None this year now, just because I decided I needed a year off.
Yeah,
but it's amazing. It's just great, and it's just, again, it gives you a sense of community and something outside of the world of work. Because again, journalists are very prone to just being friends with other journalists and people in the sort of the brighter bubble, which isn't great. Like, so it's brilliant. Like, I've made great friends out of running, and just a sense of, being part of something which is uniquely your own as well. I think that's important, to have something that this is separate to the 9 to 5 and, well, the 5 to 9, I suppose, that follows on from it as well. So, like, it is really important.
To finish off the rapid fire round, I have five quick questions, 5 quick answers. Question number 1: what is the one media moment that has changed how you work?
I would say the pandemic. It did. The amount of growing up that you will do in that situation, like in terms of experience, perspective, it 100% is that.
Number 2, give me one example of something that failed that you learned from.
I think there's tons of, you could pick up a zillion examples, but I always get annoyed because, again, this is something for PR people as well. I have an inbox of literally thousands of emails. When you miss something really good, or somebody sent in a news tip that turned into something and you've missed it, just by no fault other than just sheer volume. Like, that will always, I'm like, if I only had my phone on that 1 minute, I could have had an absolutely banger of a story. And that's happened a few times, but yeah.
What one universal belief about public relations do you think is wrong or overstated?
It's a really tough one. I think the idea that everything is spin and it's this cozy world, I think there is a lot of that, and that's perception that the industry needs to shake. So that, I think it's not true of everybody, and it's certainly not true of most people I know who are journalists and, wider in PR, that this is some sort of cozy thing. We're all like scratching each other's backs and stuff. So I think that's something which isn't true.
Number 4, what is one piece of advice that you'd wish you'd had earlier in your career?
I would say the boundaries thing and having stuff outside of work, because, again, I wouldn't have gotten where I am, not to say that I'm at some sort of peak of any sort of mountain of a career, but I wouldn't be as happy as I am and working as hard as I am in this career without being determined and obsessive about it. But I think just in terms of overall healthiness, you need to have space outside of it and have good people outside in your life as well.
And the last question, the rapid fire round. What book do you think everyone in your job should read?
I think people in my job should read more fiction in general. I think we're all obsessed with doing all these books and Robert Caro's Power Broker and all that sort of stuff. Like Patrick Radden Keefe, in terms of actual nonfiction, he just writes better than any journalist ever does, because it reads like a novel. Anything else, like, I mean, The Bee Sting recently, brilliant. Like, you need to understand, like, if you're in the industry of journalism, you need to understand the culture and everything outside there. And if we're just reading books about politics, or we're just reading books about economics or biographies of journalists, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. You need to know something a bit more colourful, a little bit more life in it.
Thank you for joining me today. That was a fascinating insight.
Zach, pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening and watching today. If you like the show, please like us and follow us. And we look forward to you coming back the next time when we get more Inside Media Relations.